Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Nick.
And I'm Alistair.
And this fortnight we will be looking at Frankenstein-esque, heavily Oscar-nominated Emma Stone movie Poor Things and the latest Marvel show Echo. But before we get into all of those, Alistair, what else have you consumed in the last fortnight?
Well, I've been trying to get through all of the Oscar Best Picture nominated films, the same films that are also nominated for the BAFTAs. As it's that time of year, the nominations have been announced. Everyone's trying to watch their way through any of the ones they've not seen so far to form predictions and opinions ahead of the Oscars, which are in March this year. So with that in mind, I went to see Anatomy of a Fall, which is a French film that's been nominated for Best Picture, and it's picked up a gaggle of other nominees. I think it's got slightly more BAFTAs. It's a sort of courtroom drama, largely. The plot is it's about this woman. She's German. She lives with her husband. They're both writers. They live in a sort of isolated house somewhere in the French Alps. They have a young son who's blind, and one day the husband takes a mysterious fall from the top of the house, which he dies. Police investigating believe that he was hit over the head and then in an ensuing struggle fell from the balcony, whereas his wife, who's the only sort of suspect, argues that he didn't, and that the most likely explanation is that he committed suicide. And the rest of the film is unpicking the evidence either way for this film. And what's great about it is it's very, very tense, and it really keeps that ambiguity. This is not a film that tells you from the beginning what the right answer is, and you kind of hope justice will prevail one way or another. It's actually, and it does a good job of keeping that sense of ambiguity up until the end. So it's a good tense thriller in that regard, with quite a simple premise.
I mean, as someone who did enjoy the whole of Poker Face, I feel like telling you who did it at the beginning can work.
Yeah, I guess the point of the Poker Face is that we see how it sort of unravels. So how the carefully constructed web of lies that allowed someone at first to get away with murder comes to part as someone kind of pokes their nose into their business and asks questions. And crucially knows when people are lying. Natasha Lyonne could crack Anatomy of a Fall in probably about the first 10 minutes. Really much of a film, because she could ask the main character and tell if she was lying or not when she said, "No, my husband fell." I guess that's why, as they say, character drives plot, not plot drives character. Because you put different characters in different circumstances and the plots don't work.
Especially when those characters have magic superpowers, yeah.
Yeah.
But I saw the trailer for this before some film we saw at some point before Christmas. And it did look quite good. It looked quite interesting. It had a certain sort of subtitled drama on BBC 4 vibe going on. It looks very sophisticated, very interesting and mysterious.
Yeah, it's got a sort of, arty credentials in the fact that, both of the main characters are writers, sort of academic writers. One of the kind of sources of tension in the marriage is that at one point the husband was writing a book that he abandoned, and then the wife...
That bastard.
Then the wife took one of the ideas from the book and used it in her book, and it was wildly more successful. So and that's clearly a source of tension between the two of them. So I don't know, it's a very specific relationship drama. But there's a lot of interesting things in the film in its use of language, partly because, the main character is German, but she's living in France and she speaks English better than she speaks French. So various times she's speaking French, she's speaking English. At some point she has to mount important parts of her defense in English because she's just better at speaking it. And there's sort of, things with like confusions, people, asking questions, speaking across different languages. So it is interesting how it, weaves the different languages together into one film.
Yeah, and plus, a film about writers. You know who else is a writer? People who review films.
Yep. It appeals to the crucial critic audience.
Yeah, no, they love it when stuff's about them. Yeah. Did we watch something recently that had multiple? Yes, it was that Netflix show about a boat that had was it 1899, 1699? Yes. That thing.
Yeah, from the creators of Dark. Also, again mixing multiple languages together.
That's what I was thinking.
Convenient setting of a ship that's traveling with people from all over the world. I mean, also, and who could forget Tribes of Europe, or possibly Tribes of Europa, which was another multi-language drama, although, less successful.
I'll be honest, I am struggling to remember it in much detail.
We gave it a pretty bad review when it came out.
I remember that.
But and funnily enough, Netflix hasn't decided to make more of it. I'm not saying our review was critical, although I didn't see anyone else reviewing it. That one flew under the radar a bit. I mean, I think there are growing numbers of these multilingual productions. Yeah, again, films that are with scenes in different languages. I think partly it reflects the globalized world we live in. People are moving between countries, speaking different languages. Like, again, one of the sources of tensions here is the couple got married. She's from Germany, he's from France. They lived in London, but then he wanted to move back to France. So that's another source of tension in the marriage, that she's living in a place where she doesn't know anyone. And, her French is a billion times better than mine. She feels alienated because she's not as good a French speaker as she is at German or English. And I guess also in these sort of high-tier writer academic circles when, you have to move a lot for jobs and between universities and things like that. It goes to show there's this quite, international, globe-trotting, multi-language audience out there. And I guess that's been reflected back in fiction. Yeah, it is a very strong cast. Sandra Hüller, who plays the main character, she also is nominated for a Best Supporting Actress BAFTA for The Zone of Interest. So she's definitely having a good year, appearing in two quite dark and sort of slightly unsettling, or very unsettling, in the case of The Zone of Interest, thrillers. So she's definitely a talent, someone worth keeping an eye on, as she's having a very good year.
Oh, interesting. Will she pop up again in Alistair's long-awaited Oscar predictions? Who can tell?
Yeah. It's definitely been one of the interesting, good films to dive into for Oscar nominations. And I've still got 2 films to see, then I'll have seen the 10 nominees. Still haven't seen The Holdovers or American Fiction. Watch the Twitter feed to find out how I do with that. And obviously stay tuned for my predictions closer to the time.
As of the recording of this episode and us watching Poor Things, I have now seen 3 Oscar best films, Poor Things and Barbenheimer.
Yep. I mean, obviously, I think Oppenheimer is definitely probably out there in the front of the pack right now, though who knows. The Zone of Interest is very, very good. It might just be too weird to actually walk away with many prizes. But I know Oppenheimer is definitely probably the highest profile one, so the one's worth seeing. As with previous years, there is, an episode we'll be probably recording the day before the Oscars themselves, so I'll be able to put my opinion to the record, and then we'll find out whether or not I was right or not, because we'll have had the results before then. But yes, as I work my way through the Oscar films with bated breath, Nick, what have you been up to?
Well, at a very different end of the culture, I went to see Stranger Things: The First Shadow, an actual theatre play at the theatre, which was also a spin-off, a prequel to Stranger Things. This is a story starring kind of the previous generations of Hawkins school kids, Hopper and Joyce when they were younger, alongside a bunch of other kids. Yeah, it's mostly the sort of younger version of the parents' generation, I suppose. The Sean Astin character from the second season pops up as a kid as well. And yes, this is the kids at school, and believe it or not, weird things were happening in Hawkins even then. And yes, we discover... I'm trying to work out what is or isn't a spoiler, but we get a lot of secret origin material for the villain from season 4, which may not mean much to you, Alistair, as I'm not sure you're particularly up to date with this show, are you?
No, I fell behind, and it's one of those things that is then hard to catch up, partly because they're these gargantuan length episodes. So there's like a lot of Stranger Things to catch up on. It's something I should really probably go and dive into, as it is one of our modern cultural sci-fi phenomenons.
Yeah, as I think I've said about Stranger Things in previous catch-up reviews, when I've mentioned it up here in the recommendations section, it's a thing that I always kind of enjoy when I'm watching it, but also think is quite brief and transient in its appeal. Like, I don't really imagine becoming a fan of Stranger Things or caring about the lore, which is unfortunate because this, of course, is a prequel to Stranger Things and does actually spend a bit of time chatting about the lore, especially in the second half. There's quite a lot of long laboratory sequences in which, one of the scientists fills in the lore for us, and that's not the best part of this. The best part is a lot of the stuff in the first half when it's just the kids dicking around, which is standard Stranger Things stuff, to be honest. What you want is the fun banter and the touching character relationships, and you're less concerned with the in-depth mythology of whatever these monsters are.
So is this something that you could approach as not a fan of Stranger Things, or something who's not seen it before, or is it just really geared towards the fans? I guess there are a lot of them out there, so it's a very viable proposition just to gear this just straight at the people who've seen the whole show.
I think a non-fan could follow the plot. A non-fan could follow the plot, I think, but they would maybe run aground a bit on the why should I care aspect of it all. There's a lot of stuff happening, and there's a lot of, especially again towards the end, a lot of vague foreshadowing of what this might mean for the future. And their relationship to future Stranger Things characters like Eleven and stuff like that. There's some very impressive special effects. If you're a connoisseur of loud cinematic effects and impressive sleight of hand and weird cracking noises and loud explosions and so on, then maybe go and see this just for those. You might struggle to fully understand the significance of the plot, but you will enjoy the screaming and weird monster effects.
That sounds good. You do like a bit of tense theatre. And so this is the earlier generation then, so is it sort of other cultural references kind of move back to the sort of the 50s or 60s? Because, I mean, what people really liked about Stranger Things, I think, partly was, that they set it in the 80s and picked up a lot of the sort of references from riffing on things like E.T. or Stand By Me and things like that. But if they're doing a different generation, have they moved the references back a bit?
Yeah. There's a character who's a sort of amateur DJ, and they have him playing some tunes. And also there's the classic, I think at this point, bordering on overused trope of playing a sort of slowed down, spooky version of a classic old song, sort of played for a sort of crackly gramophone effect. If you like that, then oh boy, there's several instances of that in this play.
Yeah, I feel that the needle drop is very much a part of the Stranger Things appeal, partly as they seem to put Running Up That Hill back in the charts. That was one of their big contributions. I can't remember if that was last year or the year before.
That was the most recent Stranger Things season. I can't remember what year it was, 2021 maybe? Sometime around pandemic era, when Stranger Things last successfully produced the season. They've been making their fifth and last season for what feels like about 5 years now.
Yeah, but they always seem to move the dial. I know pop culture wise, have some kind of wider impact. I guess it is very, very popular and very, very successful. It's definitely one of the huge hits that Netflix has had on its hands recently. Now, in the fact that it's escaped out of the interest of people who like genre TV and just into sort of mainstream tastes.
Yeah, I think it's got a very sort of approachable, likeable sort of approach to characterization. Everyone's quite nice and someone you could easily root for. If anything, the problem with Stranger Things is it gets a bit too attached to its characters. Like at this stage in season 4, there's about 20 of them hanging around. And rather than just letting some of them quietly disappear between seasons or, heaven forfend, actually killing someone, everyone just sort of comes back year after year and gets given more and more story. It's getting to the point where the entourage is becoming ridiculous. It's one of the reasons the episodes are so long, is because it's got so many characters to service.
There's so many plot lines for all these characters, yeah. It's one of those things. I guess people like it, because it's got that sort of nostalgia-driven, kind of riffing on sort of, idealized childhood thing. Again, referencing those films and stuff that summed it up so well, and, the music and stuff of people's past lives. It kind of really works setting it in the 80s, I think. Appealing to Generation Xers that have got to be a big consumer of pop culture at this point. Yeah,
I'm sure there's also a certain element of remember 80s Spielberg movies to it. I'm sure that those people are also helping put it over the top. I assume it must have reached people younger than that as well to be as successful as it is, but maybe I'm underestimating the sheer cultural power of the old.
Well, there's also a lot of people who are younger than me who really like it. I guess people are at the same age as the characters. My partner has cousins who are, I guess in the sort of, age bracket of the characters or maybe a bit older, and they really like Stranger Things, I think, So they're not coming at it from a nostalgia angle. They're coming at it more from directly relating to these characters. I mean, I suppose probably everyone's childhood still has E.T. and things like that in it. It's kind of, we can all be nostalgic. You don't have to actually grow up in the 80s to have E.T. as part of your childhood.
Maybe that's the genius of Stranger Things. Something for the old, something for the young. Maybe that's my problem. I'm falling slightly in between those two poles. I'm not young enough to really latch on to one of the characters, but I'm also not old enough to get all the nostalgic references.
Yeah, or I guess to identify with the kind of the parent generation.
I can identify with the sort of sad, burnt-out policeman a bit, but that's just my thing. But anyway, the play is the thing in this particular segment. Yeah, it's alright. If you want a Stranger Things prequel, it'll probably do, I think it gets a bit overwhelmed with lore and perhaps fails to actually be quite as fun and exciting an adventure as it could be. I feel like it could have tried harder to tell a story in its own right. But if you actually are a Stranger Things fan, even though, as I said earlier, in some ways I'm not sure how you can exist, you'll probably like this.
Next up, this episode, we will be discussing Poor Things, starring Emma Stone, William Dafoe and Mark Ruffalo, and directed by Yorgos Lanthimos. William Dafoe plays God, or Godwin Baxter, a scientist in Victorian London who has implanted the brain of a baby into a drowned woman's head to make Bella Baxter, played by Emma Stone. Bella longs to escape Godwin's experiment, and when she runs away with Duncan Wedderburn, played by Mark Ruffalo, a notorious cad and scoundrel, she embarks on an adventure of personal, social and sexual discovery. We saw this film in cinemas recently. Nick, what did you think of it?
Yeah, this is actually very good. It's got a very distinct vibe. It's got a very unique world building. It's got an amazing, weird performance from Emma Stone as this grown woman with the brain of a child who sort of slowly matures and becomes more aware of the world around her as she goes along. It's incredibly funny. It's clearly got something to say, and even though it's something you've probably seen in other films, the idea of how women shouldn't be ashamed of existing and for asking for what they want. But still, here it is in the most weird way possible, and possibly in the most sort of sex-forward way you're likely to see in a mainstream film, certainly. No, it's a good film. It's a very interesting time. It's very one of a kind. I have more detailed points, but I'll get to them. This is basically a good thing. Emma Stone's great in it.
Yeah, I really like this film as well. It's got like an amazing style. It's just absolutely beautiful to look at. There's something sort of, it's kind of gothic, Victorian, but yeah, slightly surreal, slightly over the top. All the little things, like all the sort of sets are like made by little models and things like that just look kind of beautiful but weird. Like they're not sort of trying to not pass off that like some things are like models or stuff like that. It just kind of looks sort of artificial and kind of dreamlike, but that's very much part of it. And it's got like weird music and things like that. Like I just really loved its commitment to its aesthetic. That like every scene, every like detail was perfectly kind of nailed.
Yeah, I mean, it's very arch. It's very sort of sense of artifice. I don't really think there's a huge amount of effort being expended here to make you think, yeah, this is a serious developed world. This really, really, really could happen. It's like, no, it is very sort of artificial and silly, and the whole thing's, kind of allegorical. But yeah, it's so committed to it, and it does such a good job of it, and the characters work so well that you don't really mind.
Yeah, I mean, there's even things like anachronisms, like lots of modern swearing and things like that thrown in as well, which is just kind of there more like to highlight the fact that like, this, it's all artificial, it's all fake, but it's kind of all like more like a dream or something like that, or a flight of imagination, because all this sort of strange stuff is unreal, but at the same time kind of consistent in that way.
Yeah, there's this bit which takes place within the first few minutes of the film, so I'm gonna let myself spoil it, where the William Dafoe character occasionally just burps up a bubble in a sort of massive, exaggerated noise, and a bubble floats out of his throat due to something he's had done to his gastric system as part of some experiment. And yeah, it's ludicrous, and I think, honestly, it doesn't actually play that big a role in the plot, so anti-spoilers, I guess. Honestly, I think half the reason it's there is just so he could do it in like the first scene, just to make it clear that this is that kind of film where that sort of thing happens, just because.
Yeah, pretty much. That's very much part of it. Like, yeah, I mean, it kind of starts with like William Dafoe eating food kind of plugged into this sort of bizarre steampunk dialysis machine thing, and that kind of pretty much sets your tone right from the beginning.
Yeah, and it becomes clear that he's this sort of Frankenstein-esque creator of the main character Bella, which then leads into a sort of Frankenstein-esque story. The main appeal here is probably the Emma Stone performance. She's certainly, carrying the whole thing and owning most of her scenes, even though she's playing this character who is, for about the first third or so of the film, only sort of getting towards being even vaguely verbal. A lot of the time she's just communicating through noises. Yeah, it's a very impressive performance just for that. And also, once she does begin to speak in sentences, she has a very strong, memorable turn of phrase and says a lot of enjoyably blunt, funny things in a way that's very, I don't know, not blunt in the sort of sarcastic, on the nose, I'm just saying what I'm thinking, even though I know it's against the norms of society way that you sometimes get in with, the hilariously blunt characters in Buffy or whatever. But just in a very, straightforward, unaware, matter-of-fact way, she says what she's thinking and what she wants. And it doesn't come across as spiteful. It just comes across as she's just like this, and she's just straightforward at what she wants, and everyone else is just often various levels of taken aback, shocked, and in Mark Ruffalo's case, completely destroyed by it.
Yeah, it's kind of like a child's view of the world, I guess. Is that like it's the same way that children kind of like oftentimes say, things that are just like probably true, but also like very blunt and without considering feelings or social norms and things like that. I think Emma Stone does a really good job of portraying this child in the body of an adult. Even like the way she like walks, especially in the early part of the film, is kind of like how children walk, sort of like unsteady on their feet and sort of like bizarrely like unbalanced and things like that. Like she's, I think, put a lot of effort into, really like perfecting how this character moves, talks, acts, things like that. And yeah, it's kind of one of those like whole body performances. And yeah, it's just really, really convincing and very, very funny as well, because obviously it's just funny seeing like a child in all these grown-up situations trying to like make head or tail of it.
Yeah, and then saying the thing that, I don't know, it's I'm not sure if it's quite the things we wish we could say so much as the things that we kind of wish we would, realise if we weren't so indoctrinated by the horrors of the adult world.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same as that, like, children see through all the bullshit that adults are just like obsessed with all the time. Things like money and status and the rules of polite society. And also the way, because she's not doing it in, a sort of sociopathic sort of way. She's doing it with the sort of innocence of a child who doesn't mean anyone any harm or anything like that. So when she's like seeing through all the kind of bullshit of class or status that the grown-ups are obsessed with, it's very much almost like showing like people like, we could all be free and happier if we just cast all this stuff off. There's no point in being obsessed with all these things only because everyone else is. Not in a kind of like, if I break the rules of society, I can take advantage of people sort of way. So it always comes across from a very good-natured, positive position.
Yeah, and it's interesting to watch the effects of this on the people she meets, especially poor Mark Ruffalo, who is incredibly funny in this, actually. I've seen Mark Ruffalo in obviously a few films, many of them playing the Hulk, and it's nice to see him just get to go like full comedy here and just have this increasingly sort of grasping, gesturing, incoherent, swearing breakdown as he tries to deal with Bella, who is, as a sort of very simple materialistic guy who was clearly fully bought into the world and his place in it, just finds her both fascinating and impossible to deal with, and it's just very funny. He's very good.
Yeah, he is very funny, and obviously they do great comedy scenes together. Yeah, he's a really good comedic actor, Mark Ruffalo. As we've often pointed out, again, Thor Ragnarok, probably one of the best Marvel ones, partly because Mark Ruffalo can do the Hulk or Banner in a funny way. And yeah, he's very funny in this, playing like this quite over-the-top character who's just, basically a kind of, I don't know, the sort of classic Victorian cad and a scoundrel, sort of gambling, drinking, fornicating, self-indulgent. I mean, he's sort of like a child in the way that he has like, doesn't care about anyone, has no like responsibilities, just seeks to indulge like himself all the time, but also kind of wants everything to be his way, which is also something like quite childish, and it just like kind of batters up against the Bella character who's just completely a free spirit. But yeah, because most of the film is basically just following them around on their sort of this crazy adventure they go on. It never gets boring, never gets tired. There's always some funny new situation they can end up in that's just usually hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a very dramatic film in a lot of ways. Like, there are very few points, maybe a little bit at the very end, where you feel like Bella's like hugely in danger. It doesn't feel like they ever doubt her ability to handle herself for very long. Yeah, it always seems to be the way that they can go into a situation, Bella will say something disarming, and then things will work out okay.
Yeah. There's never a sense of like this child wandering through the world is really in any sense of danger. Even that like, people might take advantage of her or things like that, but it always works out well. I guess because it's a kind of dreamlike worlds where it's not like bad things don't happen, but I guess bad things don't happen to Bella.
Yeah, which, over the course of nearly 2.5 hours, I did occasionally think, okay, this is very likeable, but it's not necessarily the most dramatically riveting film I've ever seen. Like, there's sometimes towards the end, like, there's a whole bit in Paris, like, their final stop in their big world tour, where I was a bit sort of, I feel like, I don't know if this needs to be as long as it is, I feel like they've made their point, and they're just quite enjoying doing these endless sort of comedy sex scenes in the Paris sequence, which are quite funny. Yeah, it's one of these films where it did, for me, feel a bit long, but on the other hand, I can't necessarily point to anything and say, you should cut that.
Yeah, and it's kind of, because of the style is so nice, you kind of like want to sort of luxuriate in it. Yeah, and I didn't find it overstayed its welcome because I'm always just happy just to see a bit more of that world. I guess like a long, luxurious bath, it does eventually start to get cold and become a little bit, how long are we going to stay here? But then I guess it saves its kind of biggest dramatic revelations for like the final bit. Oh yeah, when it gets back to London, the final like I guess act of the film does actually move through things quite quickly. I felt that kind of like wraps up the plot line with Godwin or God, and wraps up the plot line with kind of like where did this body come from that the brain's been put into, which are kind of the sort of unanswered dramatic questions, and it does move through those relatively quickly and dramatically before building to its conclusion. So it works on that level.
Yeah, as I say, that final bit was probably the one bit where there was a certain sense of drama and danger and oh no, what's she going to do now? Which, after most of the film being a little bit more relaxed was quite a nice change of pace. It did definitely feel like an adaptation of a novel, because it is, and, it had a certain sort of slowly following these people through their lives structure, complete with, like, chapter headings when they go to different places.
Yeah, it's quite heavily structured, and had quite a lot of characters and locations and things like that, the sort of thing you get in a novel. Yeah, but it kind of, I don't know, just kind of built out the world that, that you're in this sort of, like, dream world in, so, like, with all these, like, different locations. There's a bit in Alexandria, there's a bit in Paris, there's the bit with the ship, there's the bit on Portugal in Lisbon. So it kind of, it has all these different sort of like places to it, which you kind of see the style kind of like of the film translated into different places. That kind of keeps it entertaining and interesting.
Yeah, no, it's always entertaining. It's always fun for a serious Oscar contender that actually is trying to say, and I think succeeding in saying something coherent about feminism. It is mostly just a good, silly, fun time. It doesn't really feel overly intense or heavy.
Yeah, it's a deeply silly film, but with a serious message underneath it. But it's packaged in this very, very silly film. It's interesting because it does feel a bit different to the other films from Yorgos Lanthimos. They all have this kind of very sort of slightly weird, possibly dreamlike, strange edge to them. But I feel this one is probably his silliest and funniest film, and probably his most fun film. I did really like The Favourite, also starring Emma Stone, and also with like Olivia Colman in it as well. She won an Oscar for that film. She's very good. That film's very funny in places, but I don't know, there's more of a sense of something at stake in the plot as well. And obviously he also did The Killing of a Sacred Deer, which is, if this is a dream, that's a nightmare, and it is just really unpleasantly tense and very, very dark. But they've all got this sort of surreal, dreamlike, weird quality to him, which is consistent. But I do like the fact that he seems to be doing something different with this film. It's definitely his one when he's clearly got the biggest budget. It's departed to some degree, to be able to make this kind of like whole fictional world with loads of artificial sets, props, models, things like that. There's definitely like a scaling up as well as like a different tone to this film.
See, this mostly makes me want to see the other two you mentioned, the Sacred Deer and The Favourite, because I must admit, I've already liked this film, and I think it's definitely very good. I feel like the thing that would have pushed it from good to great to me is some sense of, stakes or drama. Maybe that's just what I like in things.
The Favourite's really good. Obviously, his last big Oscar success film. It's really worth watching. I've also got Lobster. I actually own the DVD and I've not actually watched it, which is something maybe I shouldn't admit to, as a serious film critic. That I did want to actually watch it before this film so I could actually appraise his back catalogue entirety, or at least his English language back catalogue. I kind of know what The Lobster's about, and again, it's another strange one. I think it is quite tense, but also quite silly in places, or got some sort of funny bits to it. The Killing of a Sacred Deer is really good. It's very tense. It's very odd. It's got Barry Keoghan being quite strange and dark in it as well. Colin Farrell doing a great performance. It is, one of those unsettling films in that, it's certainly the ending, which I definitely won't spoil. So he's done a lot of good work. Definitely one of the sort of most striking and visually arresting, and a director of a real sense of style, and when you're watching one of his films. So he's got a consistent brand in the way that, I don't know, Wes Anderson has, or things like that, or Scorsese had back in the day at least. He's definitely one of the most interesting cinema auteurs out there, and this is probably the purest encapsulation of his style, because he's got the money and the scale to really do everything he's in his imagination.
Yeah, this has definitely persuaded me. I may want to see more of this man's films. Job done.
Finally, this episode, we'll be discussing Echo, the latest TV show from Marvel. This show follows Maya Lopez, played by Alaqua Cox, first introduced in the Hawkeye TV show, where she was last seen turning on her boss, the New York crime lord Kingpin, aka Wilson Fisk. This show picks up with Maya on the run from Fisk's henchmen. She returns to her hometown, where she reconnects with old friends and family, whilst plotting her revenge. However, something strange and mystical is also happening, connecting Maya to her ancestors. We've seen this 5-episode miniseries on Disney+. Nick, what did you think of it?
I thought this was decent enough, sort of solid, low-level superhero action. Yeah, I thought it did what it needed to do, and I thought the story moved along well. I found the character watchable. Is it damning with faint praise to say that Marvel finally made a basically decent superhero story when that really is kind of all they do? Yeah, it kind of is a bit, but nonetheless, well done guys, you finally did it. There's some clunky moments at the beginning and end, I think, but sort of the rest of it, sort of sandwiched between them, is pretty solid. If you liked the Marvel, Netflix, Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Defenderverse stuff, then you probably should watch Echo, because it's basically more of that.
Yeah, it seems to be that with a slightly higher budget, and then they can do actual location photography and things like that. I guess now they've got Disney money. I thought this was, classic, good, not great. It was always entertaining. yeah, it kind of zips along. There's sort of rising tension. There's a few sort of unexpected twists, and yeah, there's a sort of engaging plot, and yeah, a good main character. I was kind of always waiting for the bit when I was going to like, right, okay, so yeah, you've got me hooked in. I'm invested in these characters. This, intrigued by the situation. I'm waiting for something to happen for this to get really good. For there some to be like, a big ramping up in tension or things like that, or some surprises. Kind of the way that like, yeah, Slow Horses gets some momentum and then gets more and more momentum and builds to like some really nail biting TV. I just felt this never really got up above a sort of a light canter. Didn't really get faster than that, but it was still certainly entertaining.
Yeah, I think there was a bit of a flicker of intensity in, I think, the fourth episode when Vincent D'Onofrio turned up for his big dinner time scene. But yeah, I don't think it really ever rose quite above that. I think the ending was a bit of a slight peter out, which is the biggest problem. I don't know. I try not to consume too much of the Marvel behind the scenes speculator, whistleblower, mysterious sources crap, because it's just too much of it, and who has the time?
It's all a bit inside baseball. Really.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk about this being heavily cut up and edited and re-edited and shortened down, and I think there are elements where you could sort of see that. I think especially towards the end, I get the feeling the ending was probably a bit longer and different in whatever the original cut was. But for the most part, it's surprisingly coherent given all that. It does, yeah, as you say, set out a decent cast of new characters from Echo's hometown. And it does give the character herself a bit more of a background and a bit more motivation, and Alakra Cox is actually quite good as a lead, and quite compelling and quite watchable when she's given, actual material to work with. I liked Hawkeye. I was quite complimentary about Hawkeye. But the one thing that didn't work in that series was the Echo character, and I'm pleased to see that when she's actually given the material, she actually is good.
Yeah, I think she was just a bit of a henchwoman in Hawkeye, a sub-baddie behind. Again, yeah, Fisk, who's a recurring villain across the Netflix Marvel stuff that you mentioned before, and yeah, now into the Disney Plus Marvel stuff. But in this, they really kind of dive into her as a character. Putting her in her hometown makes her feel more like a three-dimensional person in that we can introduce parents, grandparents, cousins, school friends, kind of makes the person seem more like a person when you see where they came from. And yeah, it's really interesting to focus on the Native American community there, which is again, sort of an unexplored, I guess, area of the MCU. Yeah, and also something we don't see represented a huge amount on TV. Yeah, sort of modern depictions of Native Americans living in small town modern America, and it was kind of felt like a sort of respectful and well developed portrayal of that community. There was quite a funny bit where her grandfather, who runs a sort of fix-it shop and tourist things, just sells inflated, overly expensive artifacts of dubious origin to idiot white people, which was quite funny. There was that element that worked.
Yeah, there were quite a few supporting characters that actually had, a good amount of charm, which does a lot to sell this sort of show, to be honest. If there's actually people you like to spend time with, and it isn't just endless glaring shots of the hero. And yeah, I think the Echo stuff in Hawkeye ended up suffering because they clearly decided they were going to hold off till the end of, was it episode 4 or 5? Like quite close to the end before revealing the Kingpin. But the problem with that decision is that they meant they couldn't show anything of Echo's motivations or origins or whatever, because it would have involved showing the Kingpin. So she just sort of hung around for the whole season, unable to tell you why she was doing anything, which didn't really work. And leads to the other clunky bit of this series, which is the opening of episode 1, where there's like a half-hour montage where they basically do all the character development for Maya Lopez that they should have done in Hawkeye. It really did feel like they were just going back and go, okay, here's what we should probably have done by now. Here's that. Here's some motivation for this character at last. I was like, well, it has led to quite a weird sort of half-hour catch-up montage, but I'm glad you did it eventually, I suppose.
Yeah, we got her backstory and then all the events in New York, and then cuts to arriving in the small town.
Yes, but when I say montage, I mean it's like half an hour long. It's half the episode is previously on. It's weird.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. And there's no time limit on how long your montages can be. They usually around 15 minutes. That film Elvis is pretty much 3-hour long montage. It's a bit of a headache, to be honest. But we're not here to review that. It does a sort of weird thing of like, here's all this stuff in New York, and now handbrake turn, this is a small town crime drama.
Yeah, we didn't binge any of this. We watched it one episode at a time, like good citizens. And it was a bit weird to sit down and watch just episode 1 and think, well, that felt like about half an episode of a TV show, which sort of got to the actual plot of the show about, halfway through.
Yeah, and the final episode was like massively shorter than the others. So yeah, which also felt like kind of half an episode as well. Just sort of basically like literally did the wrap up and then said the end.
Yeah, I don't know. We may never know truly how much of that is edits or rewrites or whatever. But yeah, there were certainly decisions made about Echo's superpowers, which ended up feeling a bit like they sort of lurched out of nowhere in the final episode and led to a conclusion which both felt a bit rushed and felt a bit out of step with the rest of the show. Which, it didn't put me off the whole thing, because I think, as I say, the show did do a lot to sell me on the character and her supporting cast, which is, in this sort of show, the main thing you need to do to persuade me that I might be willing to see this character again, if they do another series of this, or if she pops up in Daredevil, or both.
Yeah, I mean, the things with her past, and as I alluded to in the intro, these mysterious goings on, they kind of do a good job of building up like a sense of mystery. And what I quite liked about the show is that I kind of thought, from like the trailer material and also the way Echo was presented in Hawkeye that we discussed, is that what you were getting with this is a sort of street level superhero crime show. Basically, yeah, someone with some enhanced combat abilities, skills and equipment takes on gun runners and drug dealers and things like that, which is, kind of what you get from Daredevil, which we mentioned, yeah, and he crops up here for a brief 2-minute cameo in this show. And yeah, something that's, yeah, somewhere between a sort of gritty crime show and a superhero show. But then, yeah, from the kind of the opening scene, this show does say, like, yeah, there's also a strong supernatural element to this, which was like, okay, that's a whole interesting angle I didn't expect it to have. And it's kind of quite interesting developed through these flashbacks to her ancestors, especially like the one about, her ancestor in the early part of the 20th century. That's kind of done as like a black and white silent film. Because I guess the other thing that we haven't mentioned is that, yeah, the character of Echo is deaf, and fitting in a story through like a silent film for a silent character, I thought worked quite well. And the show does a good job of putting out these mysteries with these sort of side stories of like, here's a flashback to what her community was up to before contact with Europe. Here's a flashback to what they, someone she's related to was doing in like 1910 or something like that, 1910, 1920, and then taking that up to today. And there was quite an interesting sense of like, oh, this is clearly building to something. And at the end, it wasn't a particularly, I don't know, it didn't link up hugely with the main plot. And it also was very much the kind of quite obvious, like, you have the connection to your ancestors and their strength. And it seemed, I don't know, quite straightforward. Again, more could have probably been done with that.
Yeah, it was... Both parts are interesting, but it never felt like the two parts really belonged together. It felt like they were mostly making the crime show with just enough build-up for the supernatural stuff that it didn't completely come out of nowhere. Yeah, as I say, it's a slightly weird sort of show in some ways that feels a bit not quite coherent as a whole. But the character stuff and storytelling and the fact that there actually is a single plot that goes from beginning to end and like holds together and makes sense, that does at least give you a solid basis to build on. This show has, I gather, been quite successful, so maybe they will do more. Who knows? Again, I wouldn't say no.
Well, it is entertaining, and yeah, and it's got some good scenes and things like that. Possibly the best scene in the whole thing is there's a train heist scene, which is generally pretty tense, and really kind of makes you believe in like the danger that Echo is in, Maya Lopez jumping on and off a train at high speed. It's not the high stakes or something like Loki when like the whole universe is falling to bits, but it does successfully sell you on this character doing this stunt and the tension in it. So like bits like that, I kind of just make it just pretty entertaining.
Yeah, I thought the fight in the skating rink in episode 3 was pretty good as well. Some good, solid blows being struck there. Yeah, but I'm genuinely a fan of this sort of slightly lower stakes superhero stuff. I think a lot of these things work a lot better when it's just about one person punching another person in the name of something or other, rather than blowing it up to cosmic special effect zapping levels. So yeah, if they want to do a bit more of this, I certainly wouldn't complain.
Yeah, and it's taking it back to kind of the core of the genre, which is fighting crime. Yeah, there's not anything more grandiose here than just like heavies and henchmen trying to like deal some weapons, sell some drugs. It's just superhero fights crime, kind of the meat and potatoes of the genre. But it actually works here without people getting too lost in the abstract nature of superheroes or things like that, which like a lot of shows and films can do. There's something really to be said for telling a simple story and just telling it in a sort of dramatic and effective way.
Yeah, no, I think even though there are parts of it that are a bit weird, the basic simplicity of the story, I think, pulls it through to be at least decent, which maybe my standards have just been lowered by good old Secret Invasion, but yeah, I'll take it.
Yeah, I mean, Secret Invasion, I don't know, it tried to be more sophisticated, but ended up being far duller than this, which is more simple on paper, but it's just more entertaining.
Well, yeah, and the characters and actors, I think, are a lot more switched on here.
Yeah, there's that as well, yeah. And yeah, I did like how they focused your attention in on Maya. There's lots of bits when, like, there's no sound, but there's like subtitles and things like that. And it kind of really brings you into her perspective and you see this world through her eyes, not just the world of this Native American community, but the world of this deaf person. And, they kind of did a good job of putting you in the sense of the character and seeing it from her perspective, which again is like, what made the show work. You want to be with this person, their charismatic lead. They hold your attention. You can see the world from their perspective and, just tell a simple story. Not much more to it than that.
Yeah, and the fact that she's deaf was, I think, used in interesting ways. It never felt particularly like it was the core point of the show, but it was always present.
The show, I think, was more interested in saying something about modern Native Americans and their heritage and their story than it was about people with disabilities or deaf people. But it was good at showing you what it's like to be her, so you can relate to her as a person. Even if it was just kind of, it's not necessarily something it was interested in exploring in a particularly detailed way, maybe in a future season. But yeah, it was more interested in the Native American aspect of her character.
Yeah, and I think it used it in good ways to sort of inform the character. Like, there's a bit in it where it's pointed out towards the end that the Kingpin develops this ridiculous contact lens technology that lets them communicate without him learning sign language, and he keeps this constant cycle of interpreters coming and going to translate sign language for him, also that he doesn't have to bother learning sign language to talk to this little girl who he allegedly feels deep pseudo-paternal love for. It's a good character, B.
Yeah, whereas all the people from the hometown do know sign language, at least all the people she's friends with, her family members, the guy who runs the skating ring, they have taken the time to learn. It's a nod towards who the people you should be rooting for and who the people who are, the show is clearly, opposed to.
So yeah, Echo. Worth a look, certainly, if you like Marvel shows and have been slightly put off by the low quality of, Secret Invasion again, then yeah, this is worth a go. Especially, as I say, if you liked those Netflix Defenders ones. Okay, and that was Moderate Fantasy Violence. Thank you very much for listening, as ever. If you have enjoyed this podcast, why not go to our website at moderatefantasyviolence.com and listen to our previous episodes, read our articles, just drink it all in. And if you really enjoy it, why not give us a nice 5-star review at any place that will let you.
You can also get more from us on Twitter by following at MFV Podcast, or follow us on Facebook by searching for Moderate Fantasy Violence. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, or Threads by searching for Alistair Ball, and you can also find more of my writing at either redtrendblog.com or my theatre reviews at Everything Theatre.
And you can find more from me at nickbryan.com on the internet, or nickbryan.com, all written out in words, on Instagram, or if you search Nick Bryan on Twitter or Blue Sky, I imagine I'll still be there. And yep, you could also join us in a fortnight's time for the next Moderate Fantasy Violence, when we'll be doing 2 more of those cinematic films. This time it's another Oscar contender in American fiction, and then going back in time a bit, because it's finally been put on a streaming service that we already pay for, we'll be covering the smash hit post-Spider-Verse animated movie Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem. So yep, join us for that next fortnight. Until then, bye-bye.
Bye.
Right. Echo.
See what you did there.
I know. Another classic.